So I think what we'll start out, I have each panelist tell you a little bit about themselves and how they support innovation in their organization. Maybe tell a story either about themselves or someone else that has to do with innovating and being entrepreneurial. And then we're going to have a little conversation among ourselves and open up the floor for you all to speak. And why don't we start with Sherry?
Hi, again, I'm Sherry Bornoff. I work for Sanofi, which we are a global pharmaceutical company, work in different sectors. We have vaccine, biotech, and consumer health products. We have about 110,000 employees, so you might think we kind of operate like a startup, but we have just as much sectors working against you when you're trying to put forth new ideas. And part of my job is, I work within the quality organization, a specific unit within quality, working with our external partnerships. But I have studied, I received a master's degree in innovation and creativity management. I worked with our head of R&D for North America, who, through part of employee survey we did for engagement, he wanted to create a more innovative, atmosphere within R&D. So that's where I sort of started some of our initiatives. I work with a group where we do innovation and creativity framework training at our site in North America. Also, work with a current head who's leading these innovation efforts throughout our organization. So it's been a lot of fun. A lot of what we've talked about so far today is certainly very relevant within our type of organization. We are obviously very heavily regulated, so we have to work hand in hand, both with FDA, EU, Japan, everyone across the world. That's where we're marketing our products. So, talking about a story, through one of our innovation challenges that we recently ran, that I helped facilitate. We had a woman who noted an issue, right? You're trying to normally address a problem you see, or you may come up with a new product. But in this case, she saw an issue with running our clinical trials. It was creating a regulatory issue as well for us. So through that, she worked with a team of people, spoke to them, got a lot of input from personnel dealing with. It created a lot of sort of administrative work from the organizational perspective, and no one's really happy, ever doing a lot of administrative work. So wanted to sort of eliminate the issue that was discovered. So she made a proposition. She put her idea through our innovation challenge. She actually won. And through that, teams are sort of dedicated. They get a little bit of a project team, some funding, and they get rewarded as well, monetarily rewarded for having ideas that are chosen. And we have a governance committee look at that as well. So through that, she's been working months now on this project. And again, as a very large organization, she finds out that there are other initiatives ongoing within the organization that may be able to resolve this. So again, it takes a lot of patience. Through months and months, she's worked with that other additional team who they're working on a much broader scope in their project. They found that it's actually not going to necessarily address this particular issue. So they actually put in place something a little bit, not so technologically advanced at this point in time, but they do have a temporary solution. And then further down the road, as this other more broad project moves along farther, they are now aware of the needs and how we'd like to address this particular issue. They'll eventually integrate it into our larger project team. So that's one example, and I think, again, I think we can't emphasize the leadership role you as the ideator has to, as far as pursuing the idea. It's not enough just kind of telling your management and expecting them to take your idea and move it forward throughout the organization. It really is, the ideator. You're now the CEO, if you will, of that idea. So I think, and we're all empowered more than I think we seem to think we are. So with that, I'll move farther along.
Yeah, thank you. Down the line, yes.
Yeah, I'm sure you guys got into it a bit this morning, but ideas are a dime a dozen. Innovation is way more difficult. Actually, institutionalizing the idea is something that takes a whole team. It takes a village to institutionalize an idea. So taking ownership of your ideas is critical to move things forward. I'm Jen Gestetic. Happy to see so many familiar faces, but also new faces in the room that are here to learn more about making themselves better innovators, more effective innovators within government. It's awesome to be here this afternoon to talk to you guys. I'm the Assistant Director for Open Innovation at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. I'm on detail from NASA, where I used to work with Peter quite a bit, on open innovation work there as well. So what is open innovation? Actually, the example that she mentioned around using challenges to allow new ideas and new people to get involved in kind of the creative process is one version of open innovation. The federal government's done a lot of that over the last 6 or so years. Several of the people in this room have actually run prizes themselves at their agencies. Government's run over 650 prizes over the last 6 years, making more than $220 million available to the public and entrepreneurs through that mechanism. Now, if you're a Fed running a prize, you are an entrepreneur because it's a new way of doing business within the government. So the community of practice within the federal government of more than 600 people that have been using those approaches themselves are a very supportive community of entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs thinking about how it is that they weave new ways of doing business through legal, through comms, through procurement, through their front office, and really make the case to try to do something a little differently than the traditional way of doing business within their agency. So if you want to try out a type of project to learn those types of approval processes, prizes are actually pretty cool ones to get started with within an agency. The other half of my open innovation portfolio is citizen science and crowdsourcing. So it's a little different from prizes in that there's not really a financial incentive that you offer up to the public for their participation. They're not really competitive. So with prizes, someone wins. There's usually money for winning. With citizen science and crowdsourcing, it's much more of a cooperative, collaborative activity of volunteers to contribute to a greater whole than they could do alone. So these are things like, how many of y'all have heard of Zooniverse? Look it up, it's really cool. So Zooniverse that's zoo as an animal zoo, and averse like the end of universe, Zooniverse. It's a place where you can go and actually, librarians spend a lot of time, librarians are one of their top users, but you can go and you can you classify images from things like NASA telescopes to help to identify potentially new galaxies and new features within distant stars that our algorithms aren't very good at identifying, but the human eye, through pattern recognition, are really effective at identifying. And so you have a bunch of people within federal agencies thinking about how we better engage the crowd to do real science. And other, not just science work, but things like earthquake detection and response, processing through National Archives and records. National Archives has this great project called the National Archivist, or the NARA Archivist Project, where people can go in and actually transcribe letters that have never been seen by the public before. They're discovering some letters from people like Walt Whitman, when he used to write on behalf of soldiers that couldn't write for themselves back to their families. Might have been the only letter that someone received back from their family, and they're discovering that Walt Whitman actually wrote a lot of those, and they're in the archives. It's a cool new realm of discovery that they're going down there to try to identify more of those letters. So I've talked for quite a bit, so I'll hand it over, but because we'll get into a lot more examples later. But I'll just say that a lot of times being entrepreneurial means really being scrappy in getting your work done. You're never going to have as many resources as you feel like you need to actually implement the project that you want to try. But so much of being entrepreneurial is figuring out how it is that you can convene a group of volunteers, the minimum viable resources that you need to get to a minimum viable product, make your case, and keep moving forward.
Thank you.
So, good afternoon.
Just to move forward a little bit because I'm trying to get the technology shut down, but it's not cooperating. So there you go.
And let's keep a little curve in so we can see each other. So we too will move back just a tiny bit.
See, that was entrepreneurial itself. My name is Adrian Gardner. I'm the FEMA Chief Information Officer. Have a lineage also at NASA. I used to be the NASA Goddard CIO, and Peter and I used to work together, and I know well about the space challenges and all the work that's been done on the World Wide Telescope and that kind of thing, and all great work. And so I don't know if just the entrepreneurial spirit originates at NASA and then we just spring out across all of government. But you know, it's wonderful to see this crowd here and see the faces and recognizing that you can make an impact, right? Because a lot of times you come into government young, bright, shiny, thinking about what you can do to better the mission of your agency, and then you're hit with the bureaucratic wall, right? And so it's great to see that many of you have not sort of accepted that wall as truth, because it isn't. There are ways in which you can actually make your way above, around, through the wall. You just need to find other like-minded folks like yourselves to make that happen. So as a FEMA CIO, I basically manage all of the IT supporting our disaster response and recovery activities. So for example, my team has been working throughout the weekend on the Louisiana floods. We're working today. We'll work through the rest of the week and probably into next week as this continues to sort of play out, if you will. A lot of people in a lot of difficult situations across our country because of this particular storm and the flooding, especially in the Louisiana area. So in my job, we have to find ways to actually overcome some some folks would say unsurmountable challenges. So for example, water and IT just simply don't mix. So you know, there are things that you have to do sometimes in advance of looking at that. So you have to be entrepreneurial in that. One of the things that I've done at FEMA as well when I was at Weather Service as the CIO there was think about that in a proactive way. We see the weather pattern hitting the country just like everybody else does. Should we wait for the weather to hit us, or are there proactive steps that we can take to address that challenge? So one of the things that we've done in the past is actually work with our service providers, the AT&Ts, the Verizons of the world, even the local exchange carriers, where we say, how can we proactively work this as a community? We know that all of us are going to be hit by this challenge. Is there a way that we can pre-position assets? How can we think about interoperability to work across those lines from service provider to service provider with the goal of actually providing service to our citizens and our survivors? And luckily what we found is the companies are willing to do that. And they're willing to do that in some ways where they haven't thought about creating sort of collaborative arrangements in the past between and among themselves in order to provide that service. For example, you will see a Verizon and an AT&T tech working side by side, trying to bring the service in to make it happen, along with the capabilities that FEMA has, because we also have some mobile emergency response capabilities where we actually have communication capabilities when we stand up in the initial hours of the disaster. But that's gone, we do that in absence of the contract. In other words, we look at the contract, they may say we have a 4-hour response time that we need to work that, but we're going to work as a team to make all of that happen. And so this whole entrepreneurial spirit means that you have to sometimes overcome the challenges of what is, you know, I wouldn't even say overcome the challenges. Look at what's written and then make sure that you're just not breaking the law, but there are ways to actually execute that in a way that will meet the outcome that you desire. You just need to search hard and long for it and make that happen. From a standpoint of me personally, I think that there are, you know, you really have to encourage as a leader, for those of you that are leaders in this group, encourage those folks that you see coming through the ranks as entrepreneurs, right? Peter and I were talking about just when we were coming on, this is no longer about us. This is about you, right? I'm really towards the end of my career. I may not look like it, but I'm towards the end of my career. And so one of the things that I'm really now trying to do is make sure that I'm pre-positioning and positioning folks that have this entrepreneurial spirit and can make a difference. And when you see that, you've got to reach out and cultivate it, because if you don't, others will kill it off, or they'll leave. And one of the things that we talked about is how do you sustain that within your organization? Because you always need that bit of disruption in your organization that then allows you to rethink about the way that you execute. And so I have the privilege of working for a disruptive force, and that being the administrator of FEMA, Craig Fugate, who is always a disruptive force for all of us. He shakes the entire leadership core up with different aspects on what he's seen and how he thinks. So he's constantly thinking about how can I execute better on behalf of the citizens of this country. And so that doesn't always happen at the top within the top job that's sitting in your agency. So you also, as leaders, have to take that on.
Thank you very much. Peter.
And thank you. Being the youngest of 7, I know what it's like to be the last. It's often a lot easier, sometimes it's more difficult. I'd like to think that I'm batting cleanup here as a lifetime baseball player and an avid baseball player. Anyway, my name is Peter Hughes. I'm the Chief Technologist at Goddard Space Flight Center. And in the NASA environment, we have chief technologists at each of the center to try to identify the technology vision, identify the future directions of the organization, and to inspire innovation. And I've been quite honored to be in this position for about the last 12 years, running the IRAD program, which is the largest in the agency. In fact, it's twice as big as all the other centers combined. And it's been very successful, and it's not because exactly what I'm doing as personal decisions, as much as trying to engage the entire workforce, getting all the lines of business to identify where the priorities are, for them to identify where the priorities are and execute on those priorities on a regular basis. I'm exposed to really cutting-edge technology that ultimately leads to new missions, to be able to explore the deep cosmos, to understand what's going on at our Earth, and trying to understand the intersection of what's going on in our planetary systems. Very amazing job, surrounded by some of the brightest talent that is very, very challenging to turn down. Very difficult. But what I do is try to establish what these priorities are and get everyone behind that to understand why we are making these priorities to enable this type of strategic thinking so that everyone marches to the right areas and understand where they're going. But within the ranks, we have a lot of bright minds, a lot of entrepreneurs, and I've seen a lot of successful people. They all exhibit these traits. When we were going over these traits this morning, the Entrepreneur 10, I recognize all of them. Once I heard them described, I will admit, when I saw the first 10 words, that I was like, no, not profitable, and this, that. Not for, at Goddard or at NASA. But when I found out what the meaning was, I'll say, yes, that is wholly valid. And we're looking for these traits. We want people to exhibit those traits as behaviors to develop these technologies to make an impact with our space agency. The one example I'm going to give is a bright early career guy had this idea of really dramatically miniaturizing some of the computing for our onboard spacecraft so we could go to miniaturized space systems. About 15 years ago, that was not vogue. In fact, most of our spacecraft were big, huge, multi-hundred kilogram spacecraft. But he had this concept of bringing much more computing power at a much lower power point, at a lower cost point. Could not find funding anywhere, but over the course of 12 to 15 years, he was exceedingly resourceful and taking the resources he had, very lean resources, and making something of this with a strong vision that he could make a difference. Fast forward, we had this SpaceCube platform that is being used widely. And this guy, took no as an answer quite regularly, didn't take it personally, just kept marching on and rallied behind to get a number of stakeholders, myself included, to support him, not necessarily with finances, not necessarily with the people, but with his support to open the door so he could go elsewhere to help be successful. So this kind of leads to my final point, is that the important role of all of us as leaders throughout the ranks, whether you're a senior level executive, whether you're a middle manager, or whether you're an entrepreneur, that we all play a role in this innovation, and we all had to do our role to help identify that future and make sure we could execute as we need to do. With that, I think we're going to segue into a number of other questions or some other discussion points.
That's good. I guess I don't need this. I'm reminded of Holdy Altakachti, who came back from a meeting with senior management, and he said to his people, well, they didn't say no, so they must have meant yes. And then I was thinking, you were saying he said no many times, so they must have meant later. Okay, so I'm interested in initiatives for moving innovation through an organization, the barriers that come up in the way, and what you personally have figured out, clever tricks of the trade, if it were, for getting that.
Microphone, please. Yeah.
This what my other mic is not working? Okay, thank you. And what are the tricks of the trade? So I'll let anybody take this question. What were you trying to do to increase innovation? What got in the way? And how did you circumvent it or get around it? Yes, Jen.
So quick example, it's a NASA example. Back in 2012, the agency was trying to stand up its first Grand Challenge, which is something way bigger than what any one organization can do alone, and it's bigger than any one single prize. So usually Grand Challenges are broad, ambitious, Goldilocks level of specificity goals that require a lot of convening power in order to pull off. So NASA knew they wanted to try this philosophy of seeing how it is that we might channel the energy of the public and our stakeholders and partners towards accomplishing a goal faster or better than we might just do alone. And we spent about a year going through a process of identifying topics for what Grand Challenges could be for the organization. Because NASA could have so many, right? Discover alien life, protect the planet from asteroids. All sorts of cool stuff, right? Like, there could be a coffee table book of all the potential awesome Grand Challenges that NASA could have, because there's just that much good content. So it wasn't an issue of coming up with good ideas. There were a lot of really great ideas for what could make for a great Grand Challenge out of the agency. A lot of it was trying to figure out what parts of the organization would be willing partners in thinking about adopting this new approach to doing business. So we were tasked from the top of coming up with ideas to do this shiny new object thing, which happens a lot at agencies, right? Like, we need to do a prize. Figure out a topic for a prize. Here's $2 million. Go do a prize and solve a problem. Where do you even start? But the top's telling you need to use that particular vehicle, and you have this amount of budget, and so you're pushed off to go and figure it out. But you don't necessarily start with a partner, a willing partner. So you're potentially voluntolding someone to actually be involved in your project. So what we did from the very start was partner with the various aspects of the business, so the different mission directorates and the centers in the ideation process. To identify the ideas that ended up being part of then the more formal decision-making process at the agency, so that when it came down to it a year later, when a particular program was the one that was picked to be the one that was really in support of the first Grand Challenge, that they weren't kicking and screaming or just seeing it as, oh, well, cool, that gives me an additional $5 million to pull off the stuff that I was going to do anyway, but I don't intend to do any of the new stuff, which happens in government, as you have all probably seen before, using these exercises to get more budget to then just kind of execute what your prior priorities were, not necessarily what the anticipated innovation was. So it was really critical, and I think part of the decision-making process that we used to even pick which one we would do first, which ended up being to find all asteroid threats to human populations and know what to do about them, was that the program executive for that program, Lindley Johnson, was very, very open to thinking about new approaches to augment the work that he and his team had already been doing over the last 20 years on that topic. So that's one point, partnering with the program office. I think another thing is, especially within the NASA environment where everyone sees themselves as their own little version of Einstein, you cannot take an idea to someone and pitch something to them and make them feel like you came up with the idea before they came up with the idea, because they'll look at you like you're a huge idiot because they've already thought about it like 50 years ago. So that is another reason why it's really important to do the collaborative brainstorming process with your colleague, so that there's buy-in early on the idea, and they feel like they're the one making the decision to do business differently, because they could probably solve the problem given unlimited resources and unlimited budget. The reality is they don't have unlimited budget and they don't have unlimited resources. So if we can get people to think smarter about how they partner and how they crowdsource and how they divvy up their resources that are maybe just not through the traditional grant making and contracting approaches, then we can get those people to be persistent innovators within the organization as they start to think about framing their programs moving forward in that way.
Can I just say one thing? So what I'm hearing is that you got around the not invented here syndrome by involving everyone in the process. Is that, yeah, great.
I guess the thing that I would add is, I think you always have a challenge when you're an innovator, in that people say, well, it's not unique, and you feel like you're alone in the wilderness almost, right? And so, this whole notion of how do you have the persistence to get through it, right? And so one of the things I would say is that, I have a good friend who's the CIO at FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. And one of the things that he uses is he uses the outside to communicate to his inside. What I mean by that is he goes out and he speaks to a lot of folks outside of his agency to then actually communicate to his agency. So he uses things like Federal Computer Week. He uses things like forums like this to actually communicate the good messages that he's trying to communicate internally from the outside. And then they pick them up and they communicate it back in. And then the organization says, wow, that's a great idea. How long have you been doing that, right? Sometimes, right? But I think it's important to use all of these communication mechanisms because we also, being the IT guy up here, we also get caught up in our own vocabulary, right? And even being a NASA scientist, there are various disciplines of science, various disciplines of engineering. Guess what? They all have their own nomenclatures, right? And so one of the things is also being able to break down your thought into a very discernible chunk that you can actually communicate readily and quickly at a moment's notice. In other words, I'm just basically talking about the elevator pitch, right? Do you have the 2 or 3 sentences that you can communicate at a drop of a bucket that tells people why this is important, why they should get on board, and what's in it for them? So I think this whole notion of the ability to communicate it in a way, both internally and externally within your organization, is extremely important as well as far as one of the barriers.
Thank you. Others want to answer that question, or should, yeah?
Yeah, I think to build upon that, we actually did do some internal training because we heard a lot of frustration from employees stating, I just can't get anywhere. I have these ideas, I just can't get the buy-in. My boss, whoever else, they didn't seem to be able to garner that support. So we actually did some, building your innovation business case training. So, and it's kind of great, kind of gets you into the little business aspect as well. And, certainly you can feel free to Google these things out there. There's many, many books written about this, or just probably free content on the internet on how to build a business case. So it kind of gets you to look at your idea from different aspects. And I like, what was mentioned at one of the earlier talks as far as, I have an idea, approaching your boss, who can I talk to about this, say from business development. I actually know a gentleman within the animal health division as well had an idea just from a simple question his wife asked on how to relate animal meds into humans. So I said, that's actually an interesting thought. And, he's currently in the process. He's working with some, business development person on the side to try to see, what would the potential sales be or need for that that type of medication. Of course, there's all kinds of teams and teams of people would need to be involved if at any one point it becomes an actual project at that point. But I think, having that, initiative to try to build that business case is just going to help you. 'Cause just, again, having sort of a immature idea and taking it forward is going to just relate in that much less success for people.
One sentence to build on that. One of the things my boss says all the time to me, my current boss, Tom Khalil, is the worst thing you can do is bring your boss a problem, bring your boss a solution. So if you have, Tom will do, if I ask him to send an email to solve this particular problem and I bring him the draft email, he will do that for me. No question, right? But if you just elevate another problem on your boss's already overloaded plate, this goes to the whole how you pitch your idea and using things like Business Model Canvas or Lean Launchpad. It makes it a lot easier for them to say yes if you make it easy for them to say yes. And you don't punt back a lot of the questions and a lot of the decisions back to them. You have a lot more bandwidth to think through these things than your boss does.
Would you like to answer that question, or should we throw out another one?
Do a new one.
So when is it a good idea to do entrepreneuring, and when is it a bad idea to do entrepreneuring? What are the situations that are pro, or where it works and where it would be a really stupid idea to do entrepreneuring?
I think it's a bad idea to do the entrepreneuring if you're not passionate about it, first of all. You really had to own the problem. You had to be knowledgeable of the problem, and you want to take it all the way to fruition. Everyone who's been successful on these programs I've witnessed is someone who's insanely passionate about it, or else learns to be passionate during the course of the way. They also really had to reach out and not be the know-it-all. You had to encourage them to maintain this awareness, to understand the competition or the competing approach, and always make the business case why this one as opposed to another solution path. Often I find my role is just a matter of asking the right questions to get them thinking, getting the right mindset, and showing support that way, and getting the entrepreneur to be thinking of how they could help themselves.
Thank you. That's good. Anyone else? I was thinking of you, actually.
Yes, I know you were. I think from an operations standpoint, I mean, FEMA is an operational entity, right? I mean, it's an agency filled with firefighters, emergency managers, responders, so on and so forth. So one of the things that I think you've got to be just careful are the consequences and sort of looking at the risk associated with sort of the entrepreneurial investment and the timing of it, right? Should I be entrepreneurial when I've actually got to run into a burning building and ensure that I get life and safety taken care of? I need to make sure that I follow the appropriate and proven probably track record of some sort of firefighting sort of code or qualifications and the way that they train us to do that, right? Train like we fight. But after that, should I do an after action on that and then think about it from a perspective of if there was something I encountered going through that scenario that I could have enhanced my response and the outcome, and then I had sort of a safe environment to test that out, that is something where I think we should. So I think you always have to balance this risk piece of it, is the reward sort of hopefully greater than the risk that you're going to take, and you've got to look at that risk-reward sort of balance, if you will. And so I think that's one of the things that just comes to mind. But outside of that, I always think it's good to have an entrepreneurial sort of or an intrapreneurial sort of arm within your organization, because I think it's the way in which your organization continues to learn, right? We have to have learning organizations. I think our organizations, if you look at government agencies, a lot of them have become stagnant because they have not thought about doing work differently, right? The IT sort of industry is representative of that, right? Who'd have thought about Uber like 10 years ago, right? Think about where the taxi sort of industry is right now in Uber, right? I just got back from the RSA conference, and the lion's share of participants, 40,000, were using Uber as their transportation mechanism, right? Very few of us were hailing taxis. We were looking at our phones, waiting for our black car to arrive and jumping in and going to our next meeting, right? So I don't think government is so far away from that, right? We've defined government in a way that sort of says that we don't have competitors. But in reality, we have competitors, right? Partners, competitors, however you want to phrase it, right? And so I think as government sort of officials, employees, we have to think about our missions also in a way that says, are we really providing the best outcome for our stakeholders, our customers, our citizens, so on and so forth?
Best, or is it just better?
I would say both.
Because as usually in the marketplace, if I beat the competition, I'm good enough.
I would
For now, for today. And usually if it's budgets being like this year, next 2 months, today is a great victory. I mean, tomorrow will be fantastic.
Yeah.
Today is
Yeah, yeah, and I agree with you. And I guess the reason I say both is if we don't do our job, if FEMA isn't the best that it can be, I'm talking about loss of life, right? And so that's the only perspective I have. But I understand exactly what you're saying. So I think we're both right in that I would like to see I would say government should be the best that it can be. Let me say it that way, right? And from a FEMA perspective, what I worry about, I spend my days, nights, weekends thinking about when I see a landfalling hurricane or a major event happening across this country, I am up at night with my team just like everybody else is in FEMA. And that is an expected outcome of the way that we execute. So throughout this weekend, a 0830 call, Saturday and Sunday, no time off, okay? And so and we know we have to execute in that manner in order to protect the citizens of this country. So I would say the best that we can offer. But I do believe some of us from a government perspective are sitting back in an entrenched sort of state saying, yeah, my organic sort of legislation, yeah, tells me I've got this mission space and it's mine. I'm just not one that thinks that industry or others can't come, or nonprofits can't come along and do it better. I mean, Red Cross is a partner for us. Red Cross does some stuff very similar to FEMA, very different in the organic sort of tenets in which they've been founded as an NGO and a nonprofit. But FEMA still has to look at how we partner with those various communities to really execute. Oh, sorry.
Yep. And other branches of the government show up at these events too. I mean, it's not just you guys. I just wanted to say to your question, what is good enough for the government right now? If we look at the two large parties in our society, one of them says government is no good; it can't get anything done, and therefore we should make it smaller and smaller and so basically get rid of it, abolish the IRS. I guess that's abolishing the government, right? And the other side says government is needed. There's all these things which government has to do, and so we can overlook any lack of performance on the part of the government, and what we need to do is fund it to do more things. And if you really think about this, the answer to this dilemma is actually to make government more productive, to make government better. And given that that's what the debate is going on in our country, I would say, let's not rest on our laurels. Maybe we're not quite good enough yet.
So my comment was going to be around the timing comment that you made at the very beginning of your answer. Timing of entrepreneurship is critical. A lot of times people have to sit on an idea that they have for the right time to propose that. Leadership change, there could be a lot of different things that happen that enable an idea to be more likely to be implemented at a later time than another. And one of those things that you can be doing while you're waiting is building your credibility for being someone that's known as someone that executes in a risk-taking environment. So if you come straight into an organization and you propose a big project that has lots of risk and you're an unknown entity to your organization, it's a little harder to pitch that idea unless you have a really strong team around you of known entities that support the idea, right? So your credibility is built over time as you deliver on progressively more difficult projects and as you contribute in progressively more valuable ways to teams. So if you're in a position where you're new at an organization, join a team that's trying to do something different and be a valuable contributor to that team. It doesn't even have to be your idea that you're implementing, but help someone else figure out how to do something through an organization in a really innovative way, build your credibility and build your network in that way. But you want to be, as someone who fundamentally, if you believe you're an entrepreneur, an intrapreneur, and a change maker, you want to make sure that you're setting yourself up to have the skills to be an entrepreneur and be able to cash in on that capital when you have your idea, even if you don't have it yet.
Yeah, and timing too, that kind of goes along with also obviously following the mission, of the organization. What is actually driving, your group, your department. When I look at Sanofi, obviously we're bringing new medications to market for people who are sick, dying, et cetera. So it's a pretty important mission, obviously. But a lot of pieces tend to fall apart, as you move down into organizations. But again, coming out of left field with something new that's not really in line, or you can't pitch it towards that type of mission, it's going to be a little bit harder to be an entrepreneur in that case. And certainly lacking the passion. I agree, Peter, as well with that. You really have to have the passion initially to do that. And timing is great. I mean, you might have a great idea. It's not always the right time. People aren't always going to be accepting of something new you're proposing. So to wait for a change, you might have to wait for a change of leadership. There might be a new leader above your leader that comes into place that has a new mission on their mind that might trickle down. So it's all about timing. Like I said, we have different forums at Sanofi that we've instituted, challenges at different organization levels. We have leadership come together for various divisions that might have some funding together and pose a specific challenge out to employees. Those are all different means of employees utilizing their ideas and bringing those forward at the right time.
I want to jump on this theme for timing. It's beyond the programmatic contextual, but it's also with the resources. One of my big takeaways from business school is the importance of the timing of the capital, of when you get it, what your rate is and all that stuff. I was oblivious to that coming from the government sector. But I realized that can make or break for an entrepreneur. And when they get the money, what the return's going to be and when, and overcommitting, not spending it, in a bad way, you really had to time it, your sequence of money, both your seed money up front and understand your stage gates go on to the next stage so that all your stakeholders agree with this and that you're getting the money in a fluid way if possible, but you're doing it in a way that you actually use all that money very resourcefully. One of my takeaways for even running my program, and one of the strongest ways to increase your ROI is to reduce your investment, the I, lower the I as much as possible. And it's up to both me as a program manager and the entrepreneur to minimize that and focus on the most critical element at that time to fund. And spending that money as an entrepreneur as if it was your own and being very resourceful for it. Those entrepreneurs I've seen within the agency are extremely adept at this.
Just one more comment on timing, and I'm not telling any of you to leave your jobs, but there is also a situation where you may have a great idea that doesn't only play in your agency, it may play in another. The timing may mean that you may need to pick your bag up and take it to that agency that's willing to listen. Okay, and the example that I have for myself is really now security, right? When I walked into my current agency, there were challenges around cybersecurity. They were at a place where we needed to actually take action. And so some of the things that I had been talking about in my previous agencies, they were ready to actually take on. And I was the only I was a known quantity just on paper and through the interview process. So it sometimes means that you have to also survey the territory to look at those folks that have a similar challenge that you have potentially an answer to, an innovation that you could actually embed. And so you also have to think about it in the context of how do you scan the horizon for the opportunities. A lot of us just think that has to be done within our own agencies, within our own little sphere of influence. But actually, there's a big world out there. It's not so hard. It feels hard looking at USA Jobs and all of that. I get it. Yes, we're going to get to the human capital piece of it, but still it can be done. So what I would say is think about those opportunities as well, and even build those relationships in advance, because you may also reach back to your old agency also to actually partner up. So there's ways to actually think about it in those contexts as well.
Thank you. So how do you tell if somebody has the entrepreneurial spirit or not? If it's more important to bet on a Class A entrepreneur with a Class B idea than a Class A idea with a Class B entrepreneur, how do you tell whether that person is somebody, if you're in a position to fund them or introduce them or in some way spend your social capital on moving that entrepreneur and their idea forward? How do you make that decision?
Let me start by saying one of the things I look at is if they have a good plan going forward, but they also have a good assessment of the market or the competition or the others who are doing it or others who are not doing it. It's absolutely vital for them to have this awareness of what else is out there and how they're differentiating their service, how they're differentiating their plan forward, and whether they're going to be able to secure that funding, that support in order to go forward.
Thank you.
I'll go back to my point about credibility. As you grow in your career, you get more and more people coming to you asking you for help. Peter's been helping people at Goddard for at least 12 years in his chief technologist job. That's part of his job, is to be an unlocker of awesomeness at Goddard, which is a super awesome job. But he has to differentiate between the people that are bringing him a really, really good, solid idea and team versus one that, you know, maybe it's the B or C team, and maybe he still gives some attention, but not as much attention as he might give the A team. So a skill, when you don't know these people, you don't know them, you haven't worked with them before, they're unknown entities. How do you determine whether or not the ask that they're making you, that they're making of you, is worth putting your credibility on too? And I think for me, a big thing that I look for in people is really the small things. I mean, if someone brings an idea and wants some help, and they get some feedback from me, and I tell them 3 other people to talk to, because that's another big thing, talking to a lot of other people, not thinking that you have all of the answers to all of the problems and you're the only ones that thought about this idea before. And if they say they're going to be back in touch in a week and they're not, that's a ding to their credibility for me. If they, say that they're going to put a product together and what they send me has very, very basic grammatical errors, that doesn't reflect well, I think, on their attention to detail. And attention to detail is critically important to me when I look at someone's ability to execute on an idea and my brand being part of their idea, right? I want to be able to speak for them when they're and then be their best champion and help them knock it out of the park. But to me, the little things really matter, and not just in character traits, because you can have folks that are awesome pitchers and really great salesmen and can sell an idea and make you believe with the passion, and the timing is right, and they've got a lot of the skills, right? But 90% of that to me is in delivery. And so if you're not able to do the small things that you say that you're going to do in delivery, that significantly will impact my return ability to commit to you to help you move your idea forward.
Thanks. Yeah, I think in line with that as well, really if you can tell a person's willing to put themselves out on the line, the person bringing the idea together, obviously it has to be prepared well, and they've consulted the appropriate people in putting the plan together. But if you can't tell the person is really willing to put in some blood, sweat, and tears into making it work, it's hard to get a buy-in from upper management to put those funds and additional resources in through. Because let's face it, anything you do is going to require, most things that we're considering innovative are going to require funding or people. So I think part of that is you really have to see the excitement and the willingness of the ideator to put forth that effort to ensure that it's going to go through. And with it, again, it goes towards getting back to your superiors when they're asking you questions regarding the idea, and also paying attention to detail and putting that preparation in with your plan.
Yeah, and one more sentence on that. I think that a self-awareness of your own skills, because not everyone is awesome at everything. I have this theory of life that everyone has 100 points. They're just distributed differently. So part of getting to know other people is trying to figure out where their 100 points are, which is a joy. But also, not everyone has all the skills that you would think that they need for a particular project, right? That's just people. Everyone is built differently. So if there's a particular project where someone is absent of a particular type of skill, not necessarily their fault, right? But complement that with another team member that does have that skill, right? So a self-awareness of what you're good at and what you're not, and being able to recognize that to a leader when you're pitching it. I know I am kick-ass at A, B, C, and D, but I have some, I'm not at the core of me good at E and F, but I've got this team member that's awesome at those things, and we've decided that they're going to take on those. That will totally knock the socks off someone that you're trying to pitch an idea to, because you've been so thoughtful about how to put together a team for success, recognizing your own strengths and weaknesses.
And I would just like to quickly comment. So, I have the privilege of actually being a regional judge for FIRST Robotics competition. If you haven't done that, you must go and do that. Put that on your calendars. There's a number of activities going on. FIRST Robotics competition. Go see it at a destination near you. Anyway, the reason I raise that is you see a group of kids that get a box of parts that build a robot in a specified amount of time to actually execute on a particular outcome. Not only building the robot, but then they also have to come up with a marketing plan. They also have to come up with actually the strategy, like a win strategy on there. And so, for example, it may be the robot kicking a soccer ball through a goal, right? What's the win strategy? If you're talking about one robot, how does that robot team with other robots? And what you see is this group of kids that at the beginning of that whole exercise of getting that box of parts, they actually don't know how they're going to contribute, right? But then at the end, when you see the end product, they've all contributed, whether it be engineering, software, marketing, business plan, whether they're out actually leading the cheer group for a particular robot, so on and so forth. It takes a team, right? So I think the ability for the entrepreneur, as you were saying, to understand what their strengths and weaknesses are, and then the ability to recruit and pull that strength out of someone else for the betterment of the team is, I think, the huge sort of discriminator for me.
Thank you. Questions from the audience?
Hi. We're obviously coming up on a change in administration, and there's a lot of talk about sustainability. What would be your best advice if you have to leave a project that's ongoing in the pipeline? It seems like but basically, how would you institutionalize it enough if you have to leave?
I mean, it's hard. It's hard, especially if, and I don't know what your project is, especially if your project is sort of tied to an administrative sort of mandate, right? So a project that I worked on was data.gov, right? I don't know how many of you know that. I was one of the persons that was running. I was actually the person running around to all the government agencies, getting the first 47 data sets on data.gov, right? So what we were really concerned about, right, going from this really Obama 1 into Obama 2 was, is it going to be sustained? Right now, I think it's to the point where it actually can't be reversed, right? So I would say run as fast as you can to make it overwhelmingly successful, visible as you, because I think if you hide, they're going to find it anyway, or the dollars are going to dwindle. But if you have a good news story, run forward, I would say. A lot of people look at the silly season, which means when we get down to October through November, they look at that as a huge challenge because sometimes a lot of the agency leadership has either departed or they're sort of in a quote unquote lame duck status, right? But there's an opportunity in that for you to really put the ideas that you have on the table at that point and run forward if they're ready, though. Because the other piece is, like you said, sitting back and making and sort of, I would say, characterizing it as a solution for some of the things you're hearing that are going to be issues in the upcoming administration, no matter if it's whichever side you're voting on. If you can identify how your solution is going to address some of those challenges, I would then sort of either wait and try to position it that way. But that's what I would say. I've been most successful with just running forward. Because there's things that are going to be outside of your control. So you might as well just go for it.
For some of the programs that I've helped to start up, the single most important thing in sustaining those after I move on to the next project is the person that you hire to take it over when you leave. The single most important, because you can't possibly anticipate all of the budget woes, all of the changes in leadership, you can't anticipate things that are going to happen from day zero after you leave. And so having a smart, resilient, another entrepreneur come in behind you that might take the program in a slightly different direction or add some additional awesomeness to it. It's the person that's really critical, and I don't think we put nearly enough time into really thinking thoughtfully about pipelines and recruitment strategies for getting people in. It takes a lot of time to persuade someone to come in and work in government. And the few times that I can only point to 2 times where I think we brought in the right person to take on a project after I left. So I can point to a lot of them where unfortunately you're that didn't go the way that we were hoping it was going to go. It's still there. It's still kicking along, but it's not necessarily nearly as effective as it could have been. And so I've actually given that question quite a bit of thought. And from now on, for projects that I really care about, I will spend much, much, much more time in recruiting and in intentionally bringing entrepreneurs into that role that can lead moving forward.
One more question?
Hey there. My name is Letitia Ingram. I work for the Department of Health and Human Services, and I'm very grateful to be at this summit. I'm a 13-year, going into my 14th year, and a lot of the things that you've said previously regarding identifying talent, I've been one of those persons who's like, the government is not for me, but then there's this huge need, and I can't let go, and I must see it to fruition. So I was one of those people that jumped from one agency to another, and now I'm trying to elicit my other agent or get support from my other agency, the one that I left, in my new role. But one of the things that I found that was most interesting is that I did not realize there's this creativity and innovation management certificate, master's degree program that Sherry, that you talked about. And I wanted to know, when you're talking about growing the pipeline, what investment do you see the department going in supporting this type of almost peer, beyond peer mentorship, but really making certain that the strategies are grounded in the theoretical grooming that's necessary? And then can you talk a little bit more about additional programs and moving forward, what investments do you see are required in these schools of thought and a PhD program or a master's degree program that will be required as this evolves in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's something obviously newer. These types of programs haven't been around, but a lot of our scholars have realized that, or some purport that creativity has been declining. I mean, I think, Gifford, we talked a little bit about this, how things are changing within our industry and how work is changing, and it's requiring more creativity. So it's really, when you think about creativity, and when you look at, when our parents or grandparents were working, they might work in the same job for 30, 40 years, so they retired. Now they're saying in the future, for the next generation, I believe the latest statistics was change jobs anywhere, careers 10 to 12 times. So, it requires a different skill set. It's not just learning those specific technical skills, but really having thought flexibility and being able to see new situations and being open to those and not being, completely fearful of learning something new and being thrown into new situations and working with totally new teams. So, that's something that I think the industry, various industries, as well as governments, are trying to understand. The academic community keeps pushing for these programs. There's, I went through, a certain, my program was through Drexel University. There's other programs out there through other colleges as well. There's also certificate programs. There's numerous books written on creativity and innovation frameworks. We were talking about design thinking as well earlier today. There's creative problem solving. There's these different techniques that have been put out there. Information can be getting, again, from the internet, many books, there's programs out there, but I think any leader is going to say we have to be innovative. So these types of programs are going to continue to propagate. They're going to propagate in different ways through the organization, and we'll continue to push. We don't, sometimes going into some very non-animated groups and having them do some of these crazy creativity exercises isn't going to work. You might want to, change the tone of those or do something a bit different and more subdued. But there's different ways to pull creativity out of organizations and groups of people. But it's something, again, we struggle with. Not everyone learns the same way. Not everyone's comfortable doing things differently. But there's many techniques out there on how to think differently and get your team to think differently.
Thank you. I think we have reached the end. And so I think this has been a great panel, and these are fantastic people. So let's give them a big hand.